Let me in.
Welcome back to Celticism, relaxing ghost stories to carry you into the quiet hours. If you find these tales help you unwind, consider leaving a like, subscribing, or sharing your thoughts in the comments. It only takes a moment, but it helps these stories reach more ears across the world. Tonight, the fire is low, the rain is soft against the window, and the world outside is already falling away. So let your shoulders loosen, let your breath settle into its own slow rhythm. There's no need to follow every word too closely. You can just let the sound of the voice guide you deeper into stillness. The stillness you've been waiting for all day. You're safe here, and the night is yours. Let's begin with the night of the still congregation. By the time Father Hawthorn stepped from the sacristy, the nave was already packed. No cough, no shuffling, not a hymn book creaked. 100 faces stared forward as if carved from the same grey stone as the font. Outside, a conic storm had shouldered its way over the parish, rain marching across the graveyard, wind combing the yews into one black swaying beast. The first thud of thunder came as he kissed the altar. The candles shivered, righted themselves, and held their little crowns of flame like soldiers. He begun, as always, his voice a low bell, in the name of the Father and of the Son. It should have steadied him. It did not. He knew these people, farmers bent by weather, girls with ribboned plaits, the bootmaker with his careful hands. But he had never seen them so still. Not a blink, not a wet sniffle. Even the baby on Kathleen Moran's knee sat in a straight quiet, eyes black as bog water. He read the collect. Another thunderclap. Closer, white light spilled through the high lancets, and for a beat the congregation was a room of cats. Green reflections flared across 100 pupils and were gone. He swallowed, continued. He told himself it was the angle of the glass. The gospel came, then the homily, and with it the first wrong thing that could not be explained away. A man in the third pew lifted his chin. Michael Callery, who would talk the gate off its hinges on market day, and said in a level voice that was not his own, "You left me in the rain." The words fell into the church like a dropped spoon. No one turned, no one hushed him. The baby did not cry, only the priest answered, and he did so the way he'd been trained. By ignoring it, by continuing, by dragging the service forward with both hands towards the next safe shore. Then a woman in black. The door was locked. Then a boy near the side aisle. "I called you." An old man, eyes milky with cataract, voice clear as run glass. You did not come. He faltered slightly. We have sinned in what we have done and what we have failed to do. His mouth knew the paths, even if his feet did not. Another flash, the candles guttered blue. For the film of an instant, the pews were like ribs, skulls, the sound of rain on bone. The light slid away, flesh returned, breath moved again, though not by much. He looked for comfort in the carved crucifix above the sanctuary and saw, to his surprise, not comfort, but a patient waiting. He knew, of course, what they were circling, what wound these phrases press without yet saying. Years ago, 7, 8, a farmer named Donnacha Aileen lay in his kitchen with the roof caved in and the night pouring through. Aileen had sent for him. Aileen had wanted the last rites the way some men want a charm. And Hawthorn, who had sat by many beds and heard many deathbed repentance that were anything but repentance, had put his stole back in his bag and said, Donnacha, I cannot give you what you will not ask for. Because Aileen would not confess. Because he wanted absolution without naming the harm he had done. A harm Hawthorn could not prove, but smelled in the room like paraffin. Wells salted, boundary stones moved, a neighbour's barn accidentally burned. Contrition is the heart of the right. No priest could conjure grace for a man who made a fist of his heart and hid it. Aileen had died the morning before, and there had been talk. He set the paten and chalice. He prayed the prayer he had prayed 1,000 times. Somewhere near the back, a voice like linen tearing. You took what was not yours, and another, closer. You would not give what was. He looked over the heads and saw, God help him, the gallery full to the rafters, men and women, shoulder to shoulder, hands folded, faces lifted, as if the village had doubled while he wasn't looking. He rang the bell at the Sanctus. The bell answered before he touched it, pealing once, twice, of its own accord, thin and wild, like a small animal caught in wire. The preface became a rope he climbed. He spoke each word, sought to go out into the room that did not soften, did not alter. The wind shoved at the doors and found no purchase. Rain ran down the lancets and black cords. The candles leaned, recovered, then leaned again. He lifted the host, and the church groaned, not the beams or the roof, the church, as if the stones themselves remembered something heavy. You left us, said a woman near the front. Her mouth did not move. Her eyes were wet as winter cows. He answered then, not with the missle's word, but his own. Quiet. So quiet, most would have missed it if there had been anyone to miss anything in that room. I did not. Another lightning fork cut the nave into bones and shadows. The smell of wet ash drew through the church, sudden as a maiden memory. He saw the kitchen as it had been that night, the roof broken like a rib cage, the table on its back. Aileen on the flagstones with his eyes bright as coins in a puddle. You came, said a child's not child voice from the second pew. You came to the door. I did, he said. And you would not come in, said the voice. I would not, he agreed, and the admission steadied him. Why, from the gallery, 100 throats, one word. Because the door was not mine to enter, he said softly. Because a sacrament is not a trick. Because grace is not a coin you can throw to buy time. Because he would not name what he had done. The candles guttered, went back, the lightning did not come. There was just the dark and the feeling, stronger now that the room contained far more than wood and wool and breath. A rustle moved across the pews like a wind through barley, then from everywhere at once, a whisper like the page of a missal turned by a patient hand. "Name it." He did not answer. What would he say? He had never gone to law with killing. He had never stood in the yard and shouted. He had only stood in a doorway with his stole in his hand, looking at a man who wanted a priest to wave off whatever he lay behind him, and could not be waved off. A small light bloomed near the altar rails. Not a candle, a foxfire cold and green. Another pricked near the lectern, another in the gallery. It was as if the night had poked its own stars into the church, each one low and watchful. "Name it," the whisper said again. He set his hands on the altar and spoke, not accusation, not rumor, but the thing as it had been. Boundary stones moved by moonlight, a well brine so cattle died slow, a fire walked along a barn's beams like a man walking, and no contrition, no sorrow, only fear of what might come after. Silence settled like a frost. Then a single voice from a single mouth, the same one that had said you left me in the rain. Michael Callery did not blink. His lips stayed folded, but O'Halloran knew the voice. Donica killing, the tired burr of it, the stubborn pride wrapped in it like wire, only it was thinner now, small, as if it had been reduced to a point. "I have no sorrow now," the voice said. No thunder this time, no show, only the shapes of the words in the air. O'Halloran's hand shook once and stilled. Everything he believed about the sacrament, the necessity of contrition, the honesty required, stood up in him like a friend he knew by the weight of their arm across his shoulders. "Say it," he said, not to Michael, not to the church, but to that thin place where a man might be. The room breathed. Sound moved through the congregation. Not speech, not wind, like water pouring into dry furrows. And then the voice again. "I did harm. I wanted what was not mine. I took what was. I scalded a beast that would not go where I wished. I salted a well because a man would not sell. I sent fire along a beam." The words costed. He heard the cost. He heard, too, the other truth, the one that had gouged him and kept him steady on the night long ago. Grace is not a trick. He had not withheld it to punish. He had not demanded a performance. He had stood with his stole in his bag because the sacrament is an honesty between a soul and God, and without that honesty, the rite is a lie. Killian's voice thinned further. "I was afraid. I am afraid." "Are you sorry?" O'Halloran asked, his throat tight. "Yes," said the voice. "I'm sorry." The green foxfires brightened, and with them another wrong thing that was also right. The feeling that the church was fuller now than any feast day. The aisle lined, the transept packed, every pillar leaned on by someone who had leaned there before. He knew them not by face, by weight. People he had buried, people he had loved and let go. They had come back not to accuse him, to watch the thing finally done properly. He put on the stole. The purple looped cold and heavy around his neck like a winter scarf. He left the altar and stepped down to the rail. The congregation did not move. The green lights watched. "Donnacha Killeen," he said, "you have confessed your sins. Do you make an act of contrition?" A pause, then a faint, as if from the far side of rain. "Oh my God, I am heartily sorry for having offended thee." The words were broken. Some lines fell together, but it was not a trick now. It was the scrape of a man's pride against the edge of truth. O'Halloran lifted his hand over an empty space and said the absolution. His voice did not tremble. The storm leaned on a church as a big man leans on a door and, finding it opened, pitched forward and was inside, and then, just like that, was gone. The candles did not so much as brighten as settle. A soft warmth crept back into the room like a kettle singing in a far kitchen. He closed his eyes. "Go in peace." For the first time that night, something in the congregation moved. Not feet or hands, but relief. A long, quiet loosening like the whole village had unclenched. He returned to the altar. He finished the Mass. He distributed communion. The host lay on tongues that were neither cold nor warm, present, and that was enough. When he raised the chalice for the final time, lightning walked softly around the horizon like a tired dog turning in its bed. "Mass is ended," he said. "Go in peace." They did not vanish or speak. They did not stand and go in twos to the door. They remained where they were, still, patient, seeing. He had never been saying Mass to the living or the dead as categories. He had been saying Mass to souls, and souls do not fit into tidy ledgers. He stripped the altar. He snuffed the candles. He left the sanctuary lamp burning. He bowed and turned, and found, on the rail where he had stood for the absolution, a farmer's cap, soaked through. He did not need to touch the lining to know the name stitched there by a wife's careful hand. He carried it into the sacristy and set it on the table. Beside it lay a paper he did not remember placing. He unfolded it and saw his own handwriting, the letter he had written to the bishop the night Killeen died, explaining why he refused the last rites. "No contrition. I will not make a show of grace where no grace is wanted. I know I will be spoken against. Let them speak, I would do the same, again." A single line had been added beneath it, in a tight, unfamiliar script. "Thank you for saving them." His hands went cold. He sat. He understood. The night he had refused, he had kept the sacrament from being used as a charm to salt the whole parish. If he had gone through the motions, he would have made a spell of it without meaning to, a seal on a malice that would have had the run of their fields. He had not known it then. He knew it now. He carried the cap to the altar and set it there. "Go home," he said, to nobody a living man could point at. "You have work in the morning." He slept in the sacristy for an hour with his coat over him like a blanket. At dawn, the sacristan rattled the outer door and called through the keyhole that the worst of the storm had passed, and that there were puddles in the gallery where no roof should allow puddles, and that the church smelled of wet straw. Wet straw. He went into the nave and saw it then. From each pew to the aisle, a thick track of damp, as if someone had stood there in long coats, and rain had dripped from every hem. On the tile by the rail, the shape of a cap's brim, water dark. That afternoon, O'Halloran walked to Killing's grave. The flowers set there by the window, who had moved away years before, had blown flat, but the mound settled in a way it had not the last time he came. The wind on the hill had a different taste, less iron and more peat. He said nothing for a long time. Then he prayed for Killeen as if praying for a man going to see potatoes. Ordinary words, practical mercy. When he turned to go, something small pressed against his instep. He looked down. A blackthorn sprig lay across his boot, small, black as an oath, thorns bright as new pins. He lifted it and snapped it in two. No crack, no drama, just done. That night, the church was not full, and that was right. The village came in the usual numbers. They coughed and creaked and sniffled and rustled their hymn books. Babies slept and cried. The bell behaved. The candles burned like they were meant to. But there was a cost, and it was his to carry. In every storm after, when the green light ran along the horizon like sea fire, Father O'Halloran would wake in his chair in the sacristy and step into the nave, and the church would be full again, quiet as snow, watchful as cattle, and he would say a mass with no hymn and much listening. Sometimes a thin voice would ask for what it had missed. Sometimes an old wrong would find its words at last. He would help where he could, and every morning there would be damp in the pews and a smell of straw, and the sacristan would tut about the roof. He never said a word about the letter. He never spoke of the cap. He kept both in a drawer beside the matches. Years later, when he was too old to climb the hill, they found him sleeping in the sacristy with his stole tucked under his cheek like a handkerchief. He had a farmer's cap pulled over his eyes to keep out the morning. The church smelled faintly of rain. And in the parish they tell it this way. If you're in that church on a wild night and the candles shake, you might see, just for the length of a blink, the congregation go cat-eyed green. Don't be afraid. It's only neighbours waiting their turn. It's only a man keeping his promises. Let the last of that storm slide off your shoulders. Breathe soft and slow. And let the hush of the empty church carry you deeper into the dark, where the next tale waits with a light in its hand. And now let's move on to the next tale. The Gifted Aileen Flynn. In the winter of 1894, a biting wind blew down from the Galtee Mountains and through the small market town of Dunlea. It cut through wool and cloth like knife, and it found its way into every corner where a lonely soul might be hiding. In the lee of a crumbling stone wall behind the cooper's workshop, a girl of about 12 years old crouched behind a pile of empty barrels. Her name was Aileen Flynn. No one in Dunlea knew where she'd come from. Some said the city. Others swore she'd been born under a hedge. Wherever she was from, she was here now. Dirt on her cheeks, a man's old coat hanging from her thin shoulders, and not a friend to her name. Aileen lived on crusts begged from doorways and scraps scavenged from bins behind the inn. She slept where she could, under eaves, in sheds, once in a church porch until the priest ran her off. To most in Dunlea, she was the wee beggar and nothing more. One frost-bitten evening, after failing to get so much as a stale roll from the bakery, Aileen slipped away from the town towards the hedgerows. The moon was climbing, pale and thin, and the fields shimmered with ice. She followed a rabbit track through a gap in the brambles and came into a small hollow she'd never seen before. And there, on the ground, was a shape no bigger than a small dog, covered in coarse grey hair, with arms like sticks and a cap of tangled moss. His eyes, when they opened, were a deep gold, tired but gentle. Aileen knew the stories. This was a Groggach, one of the quieter folk, not a trickster, not a thief, but a helper. The kind who might help sweep a hearth in secret or mend a cart's broken wheel while its owner slept. He was dying. She could see it in the way his chest rose and fell, each breath shallow and strained. She knelt beside him. "I'll get you help," she whispered. His voice came back like wind through reeds. "No help left for me, child, only comfort, if you'd give it." And so she stayed. She folded her ragged coat beneath his head. She sang low and cracked the only lullaby she could remember from her mother. The Groggach's eyes half closed, and though the frost rimed the grass, a strange warmth seemed to settle between them. When at last his breath stilled, a faint light began to glow from his chest. It drifted like smoke toward her right hand, sinking into her palm until it shone through her skin. A small, steady flame, no bigger than a coin. The next morning, Aileen woke in her barrel shelter, thinking it had been a dream. But when she opened her right hand, the light was still there, not hot or cold, just present. And when old Mrs. Kavanagh passed by limping from her hip, Aileen reached out without thinking. The light flared. Mrs. Kavanagh gasped. The pain was gone. Word spread. At first folk were wary. The same girl they'd chased from doorsteps was now healing the butcher's cough, the carpenter's twisted wrist, the fever in a child. Coins were pressed into her hand, food left where she slept. People smiled at her in the street, but it was the same smile they gave a relic or a saint's statue, grateful but distant. Until one night, when a storm took the bridge, a man was pulled from the river barely breathing. No priest, no doctor could bring him back. Aileen pushed through the crowd, knelt beside him, and laid her glowing hand on his chest. The man coughed up river water and opened his eyes. From then on, the villagers didn't just thank her. They spoke to her, asked after her, invited her to sit by their fires. But Aileen knew this gift wasn't hers to keep in one place. She remembered that Groggach's eyes, that tired kindness, and she understood. It wasn't meant for Dunlay alone. So on a morning in early spring, she took the loaf and cheese they'd given her, and she walked out along the road, past the hedges, past the fields, into the wider country. And wherever she found illness, pain or sorrow, she would bring the light in her hand. And somewhere in the quiet between villages, she liked to think the Groggach walked beside her. And now, as you lie there, perhaps you can picture that faint glow resting in your own hand, soft and steady and warm. Imagine it easing away any ache, any worry, just a gentle light, helping you drift further into the night. Now let's move along to the next story, entitled Ravens of the Morrigan. Francis Maguire lay in the back bedroom of his cottage on the edge of the village, the oil lamp flickering low on the table beside his bed. Outside, snow was settling in a fine white dust on the window ledge. And somewhere, far off, a bell was ringing, the half-hour mark for the evening mass. It was Christmas week, and though he hadn't the strength to leave his bed, the sounds and scents of the season reached him all the same. A neighbour's turf fire carried on the wind. Somebody's fiddle, faint but cheerful, played Ia Cuan. He had been ready to go for some time now. He'd made his peace, and in these last days he wanted only to lie quiet and let the hours roll over him. But that was before the ravens came. It began at dusk when the first few settled on the cottage roof, then more and more until the sound of them shifting on the slates was like heavy rain. The sky grew darker than it had any right to be. Looking out the window from his bed, he could see nothing but the slow, restless shifting of black feathers blotting out the snow-lit horizon. One, far larger than the rest, perched on the wall at the end of his garden, watching him. It didn't move, except for the slow turn of its head, the beak sharp and deliberate. Francis blinked, and in the blink it was no longer a bird at all. A woman stood there, her black cloak flowing like water, hair the colour of the storm, eyes that seemed to not just see him, but every thought and memory inside of him. The Morrigan. He knew her face from the old stories, though he had never thought them real. She raised one hand and without speaking beckoned him. The room shifted around him, and he was standing though his bones had been too weak to carry him in months, at her side. Together they stepped forward, and the cottage door opened to a village shrouded in night. They walked, the Morrigan never looking at him, only ahead, her boots silent on the frost. People were in their homes, lit by lanterns and candles, some laughing, some sitting quietly with their tea. At one window she stopped, letting him peer inside. "That one," she said, her voice like wind through bare branches, "will not live to see the thaw." He watched the woman in the house smile at her husband unawares. At another cottage a man sat alone, his head in his hands. "He'll pass this summer," she murmured, "and he'll go with regret for what he never said." They moved on, house to house. With each stop she named the fate of those within, some quick, some long in coming, some with peace, some with torment. Francis felt a hollow in his chest. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. "Because," she said, her tone shifting like the first roll of thunder, "I will show you your place among them." The village began to fade. The snow was gone. The air grew heavy, damp and warm, yet each breath he took was cold in his chest. Shadows lengthened into shapes that did not belong to this world, crooked towers of stone, gnarled trees that wept dark sap, rivers that ran uphill into a red horizon. He could hear whispers now, thousands of them all at once, all speaking backwards, a constant tide of sound. And then, through the gloom, the faces came, not the kindly villagers he had known in life, but others, men whose eyes burned with hate, women who flinched at his approach, a boy barely more than a child who could not meet his gaze. The Morrigan turned to him at last. "You lived as though you were blameless, Francis Maguire, and yet the wrongs you did were many. You refused a dying man his last rites, not for your God, but for your pride. You left a widow to bury her husband without peace. You spoke words that cut deeper than any blade, and yet you let them stand." He shook his head. I thought I was right. Her eyes were endless dark. You were not. The ground beneath them split, and they were sinking slowly, almost gently, into the heat and shadow below. His chest tightened, an ache began in his gut, a twisting knot of fear that would not release. It spread into his limbs, a crawling, restless terror. "This," she said, her voice as soft as falling ash, "is yours now, to keep. Fear without end, dread without cause. You will walk here, Francis, and you will never sleep." The last thing he saw before the darkness closed was the sweep of her cloak as she turned away, her ravens swirling up into the burning sky. And now let the shadows drift away. Let your breathing slow and your eyes grow heavier. You have nothing to fear, just quiet, just stillness. So let's move along to the next story, entitled Ross Lake's Púca. Ross Lake lies about a mile west of Mycullen in Galway, its surface black in winter, green in summer, and flat as a pane of glass most days. In the old times, folks said you could tell what sort of day you'd have by the colour of the lake when you woke. But not many spoke about things that lived in it. Not in any detail, anyway. Rory Glynn was 13 when he started fishing there. A wiry lad with brown hair that curled at the ends, he was the sort you'd see walking home with a rod over his shoulder, whistling rain or shine. His father had fished Ross Lake before him, his grandfather too. It was on a still morning in May that Rory first saw the eyes. He was sitting in his small green rowboat, halfway between the eastern shore and the tall reeds opposite. The water was so calm you could see the clouds sliding over it, and there, tucked in the shadows of the reed bed, were two pinpricks of light. Not shining like lanterns, but catching the light the way animals do, pale, cold, and watching. Rory looked away for a second, winding his line, and when he looked back, the eyes were gone. The next week, he went again. This time the eyes were there almost as soon as he dropped anchor. They didn't blink or move. The hairs along his forearms prickled in the breeze. It was then he saw a dark shape shift in the reeds, a head, long, narrow, lifted slightly above the waterline. The shape of a horse's head. Its black mane clung to its face like lakeweed, eyes fixed on him until it eased backwards and vanished into the green. Rory said nothing when he went home that night. A third visit, this time at dusk, brought the goat. He saw it plain as day, standing on the far bank in a tangle of hazel. Its horns curved backwards like black scythes, its eyes yellow as bad butter. The air seemed to grow heavy, as if the lake itself was holding its breath. The goat didn't move until Rory glanced away to check his float, and when he looked back, it was gone. And then midsummer, the day Rory would remember for the rest of his short life. It had been warm all morning, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer. He'd fished a while, caught nothing, and on a whim decided to swim. He moored the boat near the middle, stripped down and slid into the water. It was cold, colder than it should have been in July, but refreshing. He swam slow circles, feeling the lake cradle him. Overhead, the light began to dim. At first, he thought it was cloud, but the clouds weren't moving slow and lazy. They were racing, tumbling over each other, rolling the day forward like a film on fast forward. The air chilled, the sky browned to sunset, then deepened. The moon climbed from behind the hills in what felt like seconds. The lake lay black under the moonlight. The ripples around him were the only movement. And then, from beneath him, came the shriek. Not loud or sharp, but deep, like it came from the belly of the lake itself. A sound you felt in your teeth more than you heard in your ears. Something brushed his calf. Rory spun in the water, his breath quickening, and there, by the reeds, stood the thing he would never forget. It wasn't a horse or a goat, human-like, but horrifying. Its face low in the reeds, the skin pale as tallow, slick with water. Hair in wet clumps over its brow, its knuckles, bony, hairy, gripped the stalks. In its other hand it held a dead water rat. Blood matted its fur as the creature raised it to its mouth, teeth tearing, eyes never leaving Rory's. He kicked backwards toward the boat, but the water beneath him seemed to grip. Something hard and cold closed around his ankle, and he was pulled under the water. He woke on the shore at dawn, shivering, his clothes damp, his skin smelling of lake weed. When he stumbled home, his mother dropped the kettle when she saw him. Her face turned white, her lips trembling. "What's wrong with you?" Rory said. Her voice came out thin. "Rory, what happened to you?" He laughed it off, went to the mirror, and saw the same boy he'd always been. But when he went out later that day, neighbors stared. One old man crossed himself. A little girl began to cry. And on his next trip to Ross Lake, not to fish, but to stand at the shore and stare, he saw the truth. In the water's reflection, the boy was gone. The figure staring back was hunched, shriveled, skin sagging like wax near a fire, eyes pale, hair thin and grey, the face of a man at the very end of his days. The ripples distorted it, but no amount of shaking his head would change what he saw. And behind that reflection, in the reeds, 2 pinpricks of light. Now, as you breathe in, feel the cool night air of Ross Lake drifting over your skin. Let your shoulders sink just a little lower. Unclench your jaw. Imagine the slow lapping of water, each wave pulling you further away from thought, from weight, from waking. So before we drift into the final tale of the night, let me know in the comments what you thought about these stories, and if you enjoyed them, please consider hitting like, or maybe even subscribe, so you can be ready for future tales to come. And now, the final tale is called Under the Hawthorn Tree. In the rolling countryside of County Clare, there once stood a hawthorn tree so large and gnarled that locals swore it was older than the parish itself. Its branches twisted like arthritic fingers towards the sky, its roots knotted deep into the earth. People kept their distance. They knew what it was, a fairy tree, and no one with any sense dared to cut it. No one except the new landlord. Callum Rourke, a man with more money than patience, and he bought the land with the sole purpose of building himself a grand house. The hawthorn sat exactly where he wanted the kitchen to be. The builders warned him. The villagers warned him. Bad luck will come, they said. Callum laughed and ordered it felled. The day it came down, the wind screamed through the valley like a living thing. When the house was finished, Callum moved in with his wife and 4 children, Maeve and Bridget, the girls, and Sean and Declan, the boys. It was a proud house, stone and slate, with a kitchen floor of heavy flagstone. The first night they slept there, Bridget heard it. The faint hum, low and constant, rising and falling like a voice far away. She thought it was the wind at first, but the wind doesn't come from under the floor. By the 3rd night, they were all hearing it, the same humming always beneath the kitchen flagstones where the hawthorn had once stood. Sometimes it was slow and steady, sometimes it trembled, quick as a shiver. One morning, while their father was away on business, Sean decided to find out what it was. Declan fetched a chisel. Together the boys pried up one of the flagstones. A smell of damp earth rose up, rich and cold. Maeve fetched the spade, and they began to dig. The hum grew louder. After half an hour, Declan's spade hit empty air, and the ground beneath them gave way. All four of them tumbled into darkness. They landed hard, coughing in the dust. When they looked around, they saw they were standing in a tunnel. The walls were carved stone slick with moisture, and lining the walls were torches burning steadily. No one said a word. Sean took a torch from its sconce and went first. The tunnel sloped downwards, the air growing warmer with each step. After what felt like forever, the passage widened into a cavern. It was the largest space the children had ever seen, a dome of stone with the black lake at its center. Around the water's edge, shapes moved, dozens of them. The children froze. Some were tall and willowy, their faces sharp, pale as bone. Others were squat, their eyes like dark beads, wings glimmering here and there in torchlight. A shadowy figure knelt at the water's edge, long hair sweeping the ground. Somewhere, faint singing echoed off the walls, and at the center of it all was her. She looked no older than Bridget, a tiny, sprightly figure no higher than a kitchen chair, with hair the color of ripe wheat and eyes bright as new pennies. She skipped towards them, bare feet barely touching the ground. "Well now," she said in a voice like bells, "visitors." She danced around them in a quick circle, head tilting, eyes flicking to each child in turn. "You're a curious lot," she said, "and you've come through the Hawthorn's bones. That's very brave, or very foolish." She laughed then, a sound too sharp for comfort. Maeve tried to smile. "We didn't mean to come. We just heard the hum," the fairy said, nodding. "Yes, it's been calling you, hasn't it?" She leaned closer, her smile wide. The children noticed her teeth, small, sharp, and far too many, like a shark. The fairy took Sean's hand. Her skin was cool, almost clammy. "Come on," she said. "I'll show you something." She led them to the water's edge. The other beings in the cavern stopped to watch, their movements slowing, eyes tracking the children. "Your father cut down the tree," the fairy said softly. "Do you know what grows in its place now?" The children shook their heads. "Nothing," she said. "Nothing but anger and roots that remember." She stepped back. "Go home. Wait. You'll see." The children scrambled back through the tunnel, the hum fading behind them. They replaced the flagstone before their father returned, but they could not stop the feeling that something bad had followed them up into the house. That night, the humming shook the floor. Dishes rattled. The family gathered in the kitchen, the air cold enough to see their breath. From beneath the flagstones, something pushed upward. Stone cracked. A pale shoot curled through, thick as a wrist, pushing faster, splitting the floor apart. By the time the first branch tore through the roof, Callum was screaming. The hawthorn was back, growing from the heart of the house, its roots dragging him down into the dark. The children stood in the yard, shivering as the humming faded. The next morning, the house was empty. The tree stood alone, the windows dark, and if you put your ear to the bark, you could hear a faint sound, a girl's laughter. bright as bells. And now you can let the image of the hawthorn fade like mist in a morning field. Breathe in slow and let your whole body sink deeper into your bed, into the quiet. Feel your shoulders soften, your arms grow heavy, your eyelids drifting closed. And if your mind is still awake enough to wander, perhaps it might wander down into the comments to tell me what mythical Irish beings would you like to hear about next? The Slua, the Fargorta, the Doulahan, or perhaps the gentle Celtic. Maybe your answer will be the one that whispers itself into the next story. For now, let yourself drift deeper and deeper. Good night.